Hey, everybody. Welcome to our weekly live broadcast sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. We're joining you live on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm Jean Chatsky, and my guest today is Dr. Christine Whelan from the University of Wisconsin. We are going to have an interesting conversation that I hope you'll all join into about finding purpose in retirement. Christine has an incredible background. She is the author of a number of books, most recently, The Big Picture, A Guide to Finding Your Purpose in Life. You may have seen her on the airwaves. She's been on many, many different programs and is a frequent lecturer around the country. And we're going to dig into the topic of how in this COVID era, we can get back to what's really important. So, Christine, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I know as our audience starts to join, they will absolutely pipe into the conversation. But tell us a little bit about your background and about the center that you helm at the University of Wisconsin. It's such interesting work that you do.
Well, thank you. Yes. So I am the director of the Money, Relationships, and Equality Initiative at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And then I teach in the Consumer Science Department. So the Money, Relationships, and Equality Initiative, MORE, as we call it, talks about that intersection of finance and romance and purpose throughout the life course. So basically what we do is we take all of those really difficult questions that people often don't want to talk about and put it all into one academic initiative. So we talk about money, we talk about division of labor within the home. We talk about why we do the things that we do, what gives us meaning and purpose. And as part of that initiative, I also teach a class called Consuming Happiness about how we try to spend our limited resources of time and money in keeping with our values to buy happiness, to increase our well-being and our thriving. So I get this really fun job where I get to translate academic research so that people can kind of use their resources to make the most of their everyday lives.
It's fantastic. And I got to tell you, you may be the first person, except for me, that I've ever heard use the word finance and romance in the same sentence. They just don't go together all that often.
I mean, they're so fun. You have to put them together. It's like all the taboo topics that people get upset about.
Exactly. And we are getting people chiming in, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on LinkedIn and on Facebook. And to the person who asked if you can contribute, absolutely contribute. Ask your questions. Put your comments in the chat. We will pull from them as we can and bring you into this conversation. So, Christine, when you think about purpose and when you think about purpose in retirement, what's the definition?
Well, first of all, purpose is one of those big amorphous words that we throw around, but that honestly makes a lot of us anxious, right? So some people define purpose as your singular life aim, the one thing that drives you to get out of bed in the morning, to do everything that you do. And for some people, that is a good definition. For me, that's scary. That seems like a lot of pressure to just have one particular thing. And especially as you're heading into retirement and you're re-envisioning your life in all sorts of new ways and possibilities. I like to define purpose slightly differently. I define purpose as using your gifts in keeping with your values to make a positive impact on the lives of others in the community at large. So what that means is doing what you do well, doing what you love to do, using your gifts, in keeping with your values, meaning the things that matter most to you and the things that you care about most, and then making a positive impact. And the impact piece is really important because purpose, by its very nature, is pro-social, which means it's outward facing. You do purpose. It's not just something you think. It's an action that you do outwardly in the world.
Elena wrote that she agrees, that she thinks that having to find your purpose, which seems to be one of those things that we are supposed to do these days, seems overwhelming and daunting. Those are the words that she used. And I have to say, I agree. So you have a process, you have an exercise that you take people through to help them figure out what their purpose might be. And I was hoping that maybe we could road test it a little bit.
Absolutely. So I have this sort of Mad Libs-esque purpose statement where I'm going to ask you a series of 5 questions. All right. Now, just because they're 5 doesn't mean they're 5 easy questions, but they're 5 questions. And then you put together your answers into a draft purpose statement. And the reason why this exercise works is because there's lots of research that shows that when you take small steps, you do each of those individual things and it builds toward a larger whole. Because if I ask you right now just to write down your purpose statement, I mean, I would freak out.
I would freak out.
Right, exactly. All right. So instead, let's do it this way. So the first question is, what are your values? Now, this is a big and kind of hard question because oftentimes we don't really think about the underlying values that we actually have. We think about things we should value. So thinking about what really matters most to you. And this is something you might want to take a moment. You don't have to do it right now, but take a moment. The first question is think about what you value and write down 3 core values.
Okay.
The next is the idea of thinking of your strengths, your gifts, what you're good at, not just even what you're good at, but what you're good at and you love to do. So think about it in terms of want to skills, not just can do skills. Like I can unload the dishwasher, but I don't put that on.
Right. It's not one of those skills. But if I think about that for me, it's not really money. It's more communication, right?
Exactly.
I know that's my secret sauce.
That's your
in this field, right?
Exactly. So you would list 3 of those. So now you have 3 values, 3 strengths. Then 3 individuals or groups of people or organizations or causes that you'd like to positively impact. Now, this can be folks within your family. This can be in your community. This can be a global cause. For me, it's often my students and translating research to the general public. All right, so once you do that, you have 3 gifts, 3 values, 3 impact groups. Now, I think it's really important to kind of get real here because it is a pandemic. And you know what? Life happens. And we have a fair number of fears and anxieties along the way. And those fears and anxieties, if we don't look at them, can really be stumbling blocks on our path to purpose. So take a moment and think about those things that hold you back from doing what you want to do. Maybe they're excuses. I don't have enough money. I'm too old. I should have done different things. I'm running out of time. Maybe these are fears of failure, fears of being an imposter. Whatever those fears are, kind of take a moment and list those fears. And then the final question is, what purpose-based commitments, what small steps can you make today to put your good ideas into motion? And you write down 3 of those. Now, the great part about this little Mad Libs purpose statement is that you can do it as a financial purpose statement. You can do it in terms of how you want to spend your money. You can say, because I value, and you put your values, I'm going to use my gifts or use my limited resources to positively impact. And then you talk about your fears and then the financial goals you'll set. Or as I've talked to a lot of people about during the pandemic, think about it as a daily purpose statement.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Think about it. What you can do just today. So for example, one of my commitment strategies that I listed in one recent one was that because I value family and I love cooking, I was going to make a baked potato bar with my children. Now, this does not seem like, earth-shattering and revelatory, except that when you feel that sense of accomplishment and that you are actually doing things that matter to you, whether they're big or small, that makes a real difference in our well-being.
So I'm so glad that you brought it down to that level, but also that you mentioned your kids, because sometimes when we think about things that we want to impact, I feel like we are forcing ourselves to think globally. I want to impact heart disease. I want to impact the world in this way. And it's okay. It's enough to impact your kids, to impact your family, to impact your community. It doesn't have to be that big, right?
It doesn't, and especially not on a day-to-day basis when there's so much uncertainty around us. Because making an impact on your family, there's the butterfly effect. It can make a big difference on the world around you. It is good to think about positively impacting people other than you, though. So this is this idea of being pro-social, being outward facing. And certainly within our communities now, we have so many people who need our support, need to have us work together side by side to reach greater equality and social justice. So there are a lot of things we can do pretty close to home. And again, taking small steps on a daily basis, that's the thing that really empowers us to keep going.
When we talk about purpose specifically in retirement, I think that becomes a difficult thing, because I know for me, and I'm not near retirement now, but eventually I'm very tied up in my career. I'm very tied up in doing what I do. And I think I'm a little bit afraid to move into that next phase, because I worry, what do I lose when I lose that?
Absolutely. So the first question that anybody asks you is, what do you do? Right? And so we as a culture define people by their jobs. And for many of us, that's very scary as we head toward a next phase of reimagining ourselves outside of that 9-to-5 world. And what I think is really important about thinking about it in terms of purpose and meaning is that you can then break down your job, not just in terms of a job title, but in terms of the skills and the things that you do that you enjoy, that you're really good at, and think about how you can use them elsewhere, right? Think about how you can use them either in a volunteer capacity or really in a paid capacity, but just in a part-time role or reinventing yourself differently. So thinking about those building blocks, and the why behind what you do can help you take purpose into those next steps. Also, by the way, it's okay to say, as one of my very good friends said when he was in graduate school, people would ask him what he did, and he would smile and say, "I'm unemployed." And it would, make people sit up, right? But what he was doing was fighting against this culture that your job defines who you are. So maybe we can all start a revolution of asking people, what do you enjoy doing in your day instead?
Zippy points out that as she gets older, some fears get stronger and other fears dissipate. And I would imagine that's a pretty common experience as you head into retirement.
Yeah, one of the wonderful things about getting older that I've found is that a lot of the things I worried about in my 20s, I've kind of relaxed about. I've become more comfortable in my own skin in many ways. And yet then there are also financial concerns and long-term concerns and health concerns that weren't there before. Absolutely. This is why your purpose statement and your sense of what matters to you also does evolve and grow over time. So it's not one finite thing. That's why I like kind of thinking about it on a daily basis. Sometimes the things that you worry about change on a daily basis too. I mean, who knows? We're watching the news and worried about one thing one day and the other thing the next. So being able to have a structure that can kind of grow with you is good. The other thing that I would say is that, you don't have to do this alone. You can do this with your family. You can do this with your spouse. You can do this with your friends. And while all of you may have different answers to these questions, you can think about how you can use this in a community together to work toward larger goals as a group.
That brings me to something that I really wanted to ask you about. I mean, we've talked before about how people just don't communicate about money. They don't communicate with their friends. They don't communicate with their children. They don't communicate with their colleagues. They don't even communicate with their spouses. And particularly at a time like this, in the middle of this pandemic, when our financial lives have been upended in many cases, I find that very dangerous. You've got a guide out there. You've developed a method, again, for people to just start having these conversations. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
This is one of my real areas of passion and interest, which is creating the space and helping people ask and answer the questions for themselves to have the conversation about money. And the thing of it is that, we always say, oh, fights about money are the thing that break up a couple, that money is the hardest thing to talk about. And that is true, but it's not because of the money. It's because talking about money and resources, it's talking about shared values and different values. It's about whether people feel like their time and their contributions matter within a relationship. So one of the things that I do in the many workbooks that I've created as part of the Money, Relationships, and Equality Initiative, by the way, all these workbooks are downloadable. They are free because we are a university initiative. We're trying to put that out there.
And I'm going to ask you to say where they are. We'll put it, Rebecca will put it in the chat for us, but go ahead and just let everybody know where they can find them.
They are available at more.sohe, S-O-H-E, .wisc, WISC.edu. more.sohe.wisc.edu. And right off the landing page, you'll find a bunch of the resources, and there are many more as you go through the site. But really, the idea is I can't answer the questions for every individual couple. So rather than writing a book that tells people what to do, I want to help people have the space and have a structured program for how to ask and answer these questions using all the best research out there about what works and what doesn't. So really, it's about values and time. If you have a finite number of dollars in your bank account, as we all do, right? How are you going to spend that with a partner so that both of you feel like your contributions are valued? And when we also have a finite number of minutes and hours in the day, how are we going to spend that time in a way that we feel is valued? When one person is doing all the unpaid work and the other person is doing the paid work, work that is done within the home that does not get compensated in the market economy is just as valuable as work that is done within the market economy, even though it doesn't accrue in a bank account. So how does a couple have that conversation? During the pandemic, when so many women in particular are stepping back from their paid employment to help out their families and deal with, at-home school and those sorts of things, how do we have a sense of appreciation and equity and shared values within the family? So I have lots of workbooks to have all those discussions.
Well, and I think it's important to understand that just because you marry somebody or partner with them, you're not the same person.
No.
Right. I mean, Joyce points out, she says, at this time, all this time at home as a family has sparked more conversations about what we want our future retirement home to be like. Do we want it small for just the two of us or large to allow room for extended family? There's so much just in that sentence, right? And it's okay if you don't come to the table agreeing 100%. The goal is to figure out where you can meet and both be happy.
Right. And interestingly enough, often we don't even really know how to articulate what we want when it comes to these big questions, right? So we just have this gut feeling about something, but it takes a while of bouncing ideas off of your partner, having that conversation before you can say, really what I want is a tiny apartment where nobody else comes in, but maybe we can try to rent a vacation home where everyone can be with us a couple of weeks a year. Or, how can you come to that compromise? And this time of pandemic and uncertainty can be an opportunity to have those conversations if we're all on top of each other. But I do want to caution, for those people who feel totally overwhelmed, you also don't have to use this time to find your purpose, use this time to figure out, your long-term plan, because it may be enough just to create an emergency fund, figure out what your future is going to look like if your 401k tanks in the next couple months. These are big questions that throw a real wrench into plans, and taking it one day at a time right now is noble work on its own.
You mentioned the inequities in the amount of unpaid labor that is going on at home. I mean, right now, I think we have a lot of people on this chat right now, which is great. I'm happy to see all of you. Most of the people, if I'm judging by the names, are women. Mm-hmm. Women are suffering more in this pandemic. The unpaid labor is ending up on our plates. It's been called a she session. Yes. More women are stepping back out of the workforce in a way that is potentially going to have impacts that last for years and years and years, which is worrisome. What do we do about this?
I really wish I had a lovely, smiley, pat answer for this. This is a huge problem. And every couple and every family is going to have to look at it a little bit differently. Certainly having conversations is really important. And if we go back into another sort of safer at home, sort of shelter at home period, I think we can learn from the lessons of the first one and try to renegotiate things. Have those conversations in advance. Women picked up the vast majority of the unpaid labor, the vast majority of the schooling. They, and then there's also all the invisible work. Of organizing things, of trying to plan. I'm even trying to plan for uncertain futures in terms of, do I need to try to get a little heater for the outdoor deck so that maybe we can.
I'm going to order. Yes. No, this is on my list. Like, so we can eat outside.
So we can eat outside. Now, this is the thing. We have jobs that we have paid work that we're trying to do while also trying to think about this. This is a real challenge. And I think we need to have a cultural sort of reassessment of whose responsibility it is to think about things and to anticipate, because all the anticipation, all the thinking and planning right now seems to be falling on women and on mothers to try to make it okay while men are trying to keep on as with business as usual. Now, I don't mean to throw men under the bus in any way, shape, or form, because I think the men are also really trying to keep their jobs. And there's also a fair amount of pressure on men, especially if the women feel that they need to step back and take care of all of the family pressures. Then there's pressure on the sole earner, whoever that sole breadwinner is, to keep their job. So there is certainly pressure to go around. But yes, this is a she session. The women are, especially mothers, are really bearing a huge brunt of this.
Yeah, and single mothers. Donna points out we also need to consider that many women are widowed and need to include that possibility as we lay out our plan. Yes, we outlive our partners all the time, but also we're making the choice in many cases not to marry, to remain single. The single women are one of the fastest growing demographics, and so I do think that that's has to be part of the conversation. When we did when we had a conversation, we always have a conversation before the conversation when we do these interviews. And Christine mentioned that you see this tidal wave of fear coming our way. And I think, judging from the latest batch of research that the Alliance did about how people are feeling about their retirements and having enough money to last through their retirements, I saw some of that in there as well. So when you say a tidal wave of fear, what does that mean, and how can we get our arms around it?
Right. So when I mean a tidal wave of fear, I mean that we don't know what the fall is going to bring, what the winter is going to bring, not only in terms of the virus and spikes in health issues and viral health issues, but also in terms of the economic consequences. We're seeing rising unemployment, and despite the fact that the stock market seems to still be doing well, we have this sense that it is out of sync with reality, and bad things are going to happen. So this tidal wave of fear is that especially for those heading into retirement and in retirement, who are relying on that money in their 401k and relying potentially on investment income to meet their basic needs. What happens if there is an economic collapse? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we've been creating at the Money, Relationships, and Equality Initiative is how to create an emergency fund, how to think about that, but also how to think about maybe moving some of your money into more safe investments, ones that are going to, put out a stable amount of money every month, so that that you have enough to meet your needs. And I'm so glad that you mentioned single women, folks who are single either because they're widowed or divorced. This describes me. So I am a single mom. I have 3 kids. I'm divorced, and one of the things about women and finances is that we really need to take ownership of our finances from the get-go. And one of the things that we try to do in this Money, Relationships, and Equality Initiative is educate women to make sure that we are primary drivers of our own financial futures. So whether you're in a relationship or not, making sure that you are financially secure, whatever happens, whether it be divorce, being widowed, breaking up the relationship, whatever. And we are seeing that women are really stepping up and doing more of that. And so I sort of want to congratulate all the women who are on this Facebook Live, for being very involved in their finances and knowing how important it is. So these are I'm right there with them. These are really important topics to learn about.
Absolutely. And I went through a divorce at 40, so I know exactly, yeah, exactly what you're talking about. And it definitely caused me to step up my game, but it's something that I should have done before. I mean, you're right to shout out. Let's shout out to Elena, who writes, I'm a single mom of 4 girls and home with homeschooling and being the sole provider. It can be easy to just procrastinate everything else. But I know that when I make money conversations and planning a priority, it saves time, energy, money, and sanity. Right on, Elena. That is absolutely
Yeah.
true. Um, as we move forward, and I want to get just tactical for a second because you mentioned emergency cushions a couple of times, and I do think that having a really nicely stocked emergency cushion is insurance
Yeah.
against the emergencies that come down the pike, as they always do. But it's also that building block that allows us to then, put more money into our retirement accounts and think about the longer term future. When you encourage people to do this, how do you encourage them to do it?
Well, first of all, there's no kind of magic bullet to get around the fact that to create an emergency fund means spending less. It involves thinking about what your absolute necessities are, and then knowing that you are not taking money away from yourself. You are giving money to your future self. You're really investing in your future. And right now is a great time to do it because uncertainty is coming up. The other thing to do is depending on your age, to think about where your investments are right now and whether it might be a good time to move into some safer and more secure investments if you are going to need income over the next 2 years, for example. And so what I'm doing for myself and what I would really recommend people do is make sure that they have enough money to keep themselves safe for the coming couple years, so that every bump in the stock market does not cause minor heart attacks along the way.
Right. And that's something that if you're not sure how to do yourself, if you're not sure how your assets should be allocated, where you should be in your mix of stocks to bonds to cash and risk and reward, a conversation with a financial advisor can be hugely, hugely helpful.
Absolutely. And now's a great time to reach out to folks. There's also lots of information through all sorts of great organizations like this one that are putting information out for people. That spending versus saving balance is very hard right now because people also are spending more right now because there's lots of extra needs, whether it's not just the regular school supplies, but having to buy a desk for your children or having to buy another computer. So, many families are feeling really crunched. And, I'm thinking about that single mom with 4 kids who is homeschooling and the primary breadwinner. I mean, there are a lot of costs associated with this pandemic as well. We also can't forget healthcare costs,
right?
And those can be big ticket items, unfortunately, coming up in the future as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a more important time to really pay attention to the numbers in recent years, because you're absolutely right. There's so many additional costs, but there also have been some savings, right, in not commuting and not buying work clothes. And I'm spending a lot less on my hair than I've spent in years, just, for
right.
So I think that we look for the savings where we can, and we also, I think that the pandemic has forced us to sort of bring this conversation full circle, to acknowledge what's important in our lives, to acknowledge what really, really matters, and that's something to hold on to.
It is, and to sort of go back to those things that fill you with purpose and meaning and joy. And joy is something that we don't talk a lot about these days because because it's such a tough time. But for a lot of us, there have been real moments of joy in this tough time because we have gotten to have these sort of precious moments that seem all the more precious because of the tension around us. And I'd just like to encourage people not to forget that. I don't mean to put a silver lining on things at all, because it is a very, very tough time. But finding those moments of joy and recognizing them helps us figure out where our purpose and meaning lie. And then that helps us allocate our time and our resources toward more of that and let go of some of the other things. I've begun sending emails to people when I'm delayed on a project that say, insert your favorite pandemic excuse here. Don't even, it's just, we're all in the same boat. And I hope that people chuckle and say, oh yes, that's me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Christine Whelan, this has been a total delight. The website, one more time, for those guides is more.sohe.wisc, like Wisconsin, WISC, .edu. I hope you'll come back. I could talk to you for hours.
It's great to reconnect with you, and here's to more to come.
Absolutely. And for anybody else who's looking for additional information, as always, check out our website at protectedincome.org. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.